My name is Richard Parry, and I was born in Hull in 1983, and I live and work in Brockley, which is a suburb of London. And I studied at Goldsmiths, which is sort of in that neighbourhood. And when I first left university, I had this idea of I was quite interested in the work of artists like Jörg Immendorf, who were examining political myths at the end of the Second World War and that kind of period. So I kind of thought an approach like that might be quite interesting for me to examine or work with kind of wider cultural myths that there's many flying around at the moment. So that's kind of what inspired my direction or interest in the work I make, really. And then I make work in land art. So at the last Venice Biennale, I did this commission where I installed a painting into the lagoon as I was approaching Venice to deliver it to the guy who commissioned the project. So that was kind of one land art thing. And I'm kind of interested in what the emerging values of our global culture might be, and how superficially imposed narratives can kind of sometimes be confused for reality, and how that can affect the way that you relate to other people or relate to yourself. So another work I did was, or the last museum show I had, the first as well, was at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, and I had this idea of the curator as he was passing through the Harare International Airport to collect or buy all of the African souvenir blankets he could see on the way to the exhibition, and then stop off and get them screen printed with the Louis Vuitton logo. So that was another kind of milestone work, or kind of an okay piece of work I thought I did once. And yeah, I mean, most of the art I do, I don't think really offers that much that's not already there, like in art books and history books and the kind of cliched imaginations of like middle-class art people and all of that. But with a lot of the work I do, I always try and have like a kind of important point of indifference or an important point of humour in it. Well, the artwork that I'm exhibiting here is a kind of from a wider project that I'm doing called Art Zimbabwe, and it kind of came about really through emails with these curators, and I didn't really know what what we were really talking about. I didn't really know what Europe kind of really is, or I thought it kind of might be a fake category in a kind of interesting way. So I asked them about entering 4 new works, and they said yes. I was very, very pleased about that. And the pieces are sort of representations of Zimbabwean banknotes on mirrored glass. And I was drawn to these banknote designs because they sort of reissue a kind of idealized landscape in a kind of and they were issued at a time of hyperinflation, so it's like $50 trillion, $100 trillion, and they're worthless by other exchange rate mechanisms. So I was kind of interested in how these kind of idealized landscapes and these kind of orchestrated values can come together. And I like working with mirrored glass because it's kind of quite dumb and stupid, and it kind of reflects literally the kind of space that it's in. But I also quite like the sort of science behind, or the kind of the science behind like the glass, because it's sort of like glass is like a liquid, so it's like flowing, but just not as fast as the world is. So it's not really flowing at all, but technically or scientifically it's a liquid. So it's this weird sort of thing, and I don't know why, but sometimes like contemporary culture reminds me of that kind of thing. And like the idea of the mirror as well, and these kind of strange landscapes, it's this sort of weird thing that I've noticed fairly recently, ever since I've been into art. But the idea that like looking in the mirror, we kind of want to see our false differences and our borrowed identities, and see them, or see ourselves institutionally displayed and feel like recognition and kind of feel the kind of hysterical nature of that or something. So that's another way of describing the work. But just in like a very general way, they have a kind of weird, closed-in, kind of claustrophobic, like exoticism. So they're not like explicitly exotic, or they're not like overt. It's just a kind of weird, kind of groovy landscape where anything can be kind of empirically stockpiled, it seems. So that's how I describe the work. That's an aspect of it as well. But yeah, it's kind of, that's part of it, but it's kind of like the wider culture, like this kind of contemporary art culture, which sort of is, you know, if you go to an art fair in one part of the world, it's the same thing essentially as another part of the world, and that is a kind of symptom of some kind of deeper human nature. So it's kind of going for the superficial art world thing, and then it's kind of maybe got something a bit more to say in a slower, different way about the way that we kind of want to see ourselves, or see things and experience culture, whatever that could be. When I first started, I thought, like, I have no personal link to Zimbabwe, and it was this sort of like copying or mimicking or being critically aware of the market logic, or the kind of institutional logic, or the sort of middle class logic of, like, a lot of people that I was encountering, and you know, just kind of mindlessly referencing another country, you know, put a flag there, do an art fair there, that sort of, I guess it's a kind of imperialist sort of mentality, perhaps. So yeah, just kind of like mindlessly referencing it, and then kind of thinking, well, maybe I do have kind of, in a way, more in common with the Harare art scene than I kind of do in a way with the London art scene, because, like, I haven't really had that many shows in London, but I've had a show at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe. So yeah, that's yeah, and everyone wants to escape themselves, don't they? Like, so it's a kind of, it's not particularly intellectual or clever or worthy technique, but it's sort of the nearest thing that came to hand, and it's this kind of ongoing process or way of thinking about things and trying to understand things, but in a way that, like, a lot of art's about kind of understand something in a very, very superficial way so you can get power from it or move on or show it to someone else and get a reward or something. But I'm kind of interested in a more kind of like confusing yourself kind of way, if that makes sense. But I don't know, maybe it's going somewhere. I don't really think that I do represent the London art scene at all. I think, like, maybe in somebody else's imagination, maybe I resembled somebody who could fit the bill. But I don't know, it's not really for me to describe the London art scene. It's not really, I don't know. The only way that I could kind of characterize it is a little bit like a kind of overhyped, mediocre coffee shop franchise. And there's this kind of weird thing going on with, like, how alternatives to the mainstream are sort of brought into it in such a kind of dogmatic, mindless way. And then you see, like, a lot of art, like, that's around at the moment that's being made for that, and is sort of designed to fit in that kind of environment. So the form and its content are so far apart, so people can just sort of sell it or understand it in a very superficial or disposable way. So I'm not really particularly, like, I don't really have anything nice to say about the London art scene. Apart from, like, there are like really good artists in it, but, like, they can't be recognised by the wider structures, and that's to these wider structures' loss, maybe. So yeah.